Okay, the book of Micah is a powerful prophetic message that weaves together the themes of judgment, mercy, and hope. Micah, a prophet from a small town in Judah, speaks to both Israel, the northern kingdom, and Judah, the southern kingdom, warning them about of God's judgment, but also pointing to a future filled with restoration and peace. Let's dive into Micah chapter by chapter, reflecting on its meaning for us today. The background is Micah has mentioned he ministered during a time of great social injustice. Same time as Isaiah, you can check the king's reference Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, somewhere between 740 to 698 BC. So both kingdoms were plagued by corruption, greed, and idolatry. Leaders and religious authorities exploited the poor while the people turned away from God. Micah's message emphasizes God's concern for justice and his faithfulness to his covenant promises. Chapter 1 talks about God's judgment and how it was declared. Micah opens with a dramatic vision of God coming down to judge his people. The mountains melt and the earth trembles as Micah proclaims judgment to Samaria, that is Israel's capital, and Jerusalem, Judah's capital, because of their sins. God's judgment is real, but it's also a call to repentance. Are there areas in our lives where we are ignoring God's standards, thinking we can get away with it? Micah reminds us that God sees everything. And second chapter, woe to oppressors. Micah condemns those who exploits the vulnerable, using their power to seize homes and fields. He also rebukes false prophets who preach only what people want to hear, ignoring God's truth. Justice matters to God. How do we use the influence or resources we have? Are we helping those in need or contributing to systems of injustice? It's a very important question we need to ask ourselves. Let's examine our actions and align with God's heart for righteousness. Now, chapter 3 talks about the corruption among the leaders. Micah delivers a scathing critique of Israel's leaders, be it politicians, judges, and prophets who abuse their positions for personal gain. He warns that their corruption will lead to Jerusalem's destruction. See, leadership is a sacred responsibility, and whether in church, workplace, or family, are we leading with integrity and humility? God holds leaders accountable for how they treat others. Now, fourth chapter talks about the hope for the future. The tone here in this fourth chapter shifts to hope. Micah envisions a future where God's kingdom reigns in peace. Nations will beat their swords into plowshares and people will walk in God's ways. He also speaks of a remnant, a faithful group who will return to God. Even in times of turmoil, God's plan for peace and restoration they remain. Are we placing our hope in His eternal kingdom, or are we overwhelmed by the brokenness around us, things that are happening in this world? Let's trust in the promises of God, promise of a better future. Now, fifth chapter, the ruler from Bethlehem. Micah prophesies the coming of a ruler from Bethlehem who will shepherd God's people and bring peace. This prophecy points directly to Jesus, the Messiah, whose humble birth fulfilled this particular promise. God often works through unexpected people and places. Are you open to seeing Him move in ways that challenge our expectations? And do we find our ultimate peace in Jesus, the Good Shepherd? These are some of the questions we need to ask ourselves. And we shift the gear here. Chapter 6 talks about God's case against Israel. God calls Israel to account, reminding them of his faithfulness throughout their history. The people ask what they can offer to make things right: burnt offerings, rivers of oil, even their firstborn children. God responds with the famous verse, He has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God. Micah chapter 6, verse 8. So God basically desires transformed hearts, not empty rituals like burnt offerings or many things are there. Rivers of oil, even firstborn children. No, all that God requires of us is transformed hearts. Are we living out justice, mercy, and humility in our daily lives? And all these things will naturally come into our lives when we choose to walk humbly with God. Let's focus on what truly matters to God. And the seventh chapter, it's a prayer of forgiveness and hope. Michael laments the sin and corruption of his people, but expresses confidence in God's mercy. Ultimately, mercy is the final word, not the punishment. He declares that God will restore and forgive, casting sins into the depths of the sea. The book ends with a beautiful affirmation of God's faithfulness and love. So we do not have to feel guilty or remorseful for the past sins. When God forgives, He really forgets and He throws into the depths of the sea. And we don't have to go and fish out those sins through our memories and go into lack of accepting ourselves. So no matter how far we have strayed, God's mercy is greater. Are we willing to return to Him, trusting in His forgiveness and restoration? So let's live with gratitude for His steadfast love. So overall, the book of Micah is a call to take God's justice seriously while resting in His mercy and faithfulness. It challenges us to examine our actions and attitudes, especially toward the vulnerable, to live out our faith in practical ways. What James tells in the in the New Testament. So Micah asks us today: Are we living with integrity, pursuing justice and mercy? Are we humbly walking with God, trusting Him even when life feels uncertain? Do we place our hope in the promise of God, especially in the person of Jesus? These are some of the questions that we need to ask ourselves. Uh, let let us allow Micah's message to inspire us to be people who reflect God's heart in a broken world, bringing justice, extending mercy, and walking humbly every step of the way. God bless you.